What if the person you trust the most is secretly controlling you, and you don't even know it? Think about that for a second. Your best friend, your partner, your mentor, maybe even a family member. Someone who laughs with you, listens to you, maybe even says, "I love you," but behind every smile, every comforting word, every promise, they're pulling strings you can't see. Scary thought, isn't it? Now imagine this. You meet someone new. They're charming, attentive, and they make you feel like the most important person in the world. They mirror your interests. They share your sense of humor. They tell you exactly what you want to hear. Feels perfect, like fate. But in reality, it's a setup. This isn't chance. It's calculation. This person isn't connecting with you. They're studying you. Every detail you reveal, your fears, your goals, your insecurities, becomes a weapon. A weapon they'll eventually use to bend you, shape you, and control you without ever raising their voice. That's the hidden world of manipulators. The most chilling thing about them is that they almost never look dangerous. They don't come wrapped in red flags. They don't announce themselves as predators. Instead, they hide in plain sight. They show up as the kind neighbor, the charismatic coworker, the perfect partner, or the friend who's always there for you. They're so good at disguises that by the time you see the mask slipping, it's already too late. That's the first rule of manipulation. To control someone, you must first convince them you're harmless. And so, they smile, they listen, they flatter, they mirror your every move. They disarm you with kindness. And before you realize it, your guard is gone. That's when they start rewriting the rules of your reality. Most of us walk into a room looking for connection. We notice friendly faces, opportunities to talk, or maybe where the snacks are. A manipulator walks in with a different radar. They're scanning for weaknesses. Who looks desperate to belong? Who avoids eye contact? Who craves validation? Who won't fight back if pushed? Within moments, they've chosen a target. And once they lock on, the game begins. They don't even need to think about it. It's instinct. Years of practice have trained them to spot vulnerabilities the way a predator spots prey limping in the herd. Here's a hard truth. Manipulators don't just prey on flaws. They prey on strengths. If you're kind, they'll exploit your empathy. If you're loyal, they'll exploit your devotion. If you're ambitious, they'll exploit your drive. If you're forgiving, they'll exploit your patience. That's why intelligent, successful, good-hearted people often fall for manipulators. It's not because they're weak. It's because they're human. And manipulators are experts at hacking human psychology. At first, it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels magical. They laugh at your jokes. They like the same things you do. They finish your sentences. They remember details about your childhood no one else bothered to ask. It feels like you've found someone who truly gets you. But in reality, you've just entered the grooming phase. This is when manipulators are gathering intel. Every story you share is ammunition. Every secret is a future weapon. Every fear you confess becomes a tool for control. They're not bonding with you. They're building a playbook, your playbook. But eventually, they test the waters. Maybe they insult you in a joking way just to see how you react. Maybe they push a small boundary to measure if you'll push back. Maybe they disappear for a while to see if you'll chase them. If you let it slide, if you excuse it or blame yourself, they've confirmed their power. And from there, they tighten their grip. Step by step. Slowly. Until you don't even notice how much control they've taken. One of their deadliest tricks is the illusion of choice. Manipulators make you believe you're acting freely when in reality, every option leads exactly where they want you. Think of a magician forcing you to choose a card. You feel like you picked it yourself, but the truth is you never had a choice at all. That's how manipulators work. They stage the situation, plant the suggestion, then sit back as you walk right into the trap, believing the whole time it was your decision. This is why victims so often blame themselves. They look back and think, "But I agreed to this, didn't I?" Not realizing that every choice was engineered from the very beginning. We like to imagine manipulators as rare monsters, cult leaders, con artists, criminal masterminds. But the unsettling reality? They're everywhere. At work, as the boss who pits co-workers against each other. In friendships, as the one who guilt trips you into endless favors. In families, as the relative who plays the victim to keep everyone under control. In relationships, as the partner who uses love as a bargaining chip. Some operate on a small scale. Others manipulate entire groups, communities, even nations. But the tools are always the same. So why do manipulators succeed? Because most of us don't want to believe they exist. We're taught to give the benefit of the doubt, to trust until proven wrong, to see the good in people. And while those values are noble, they create blind spots. Manipulators thrive in those blind spots. They survive because people excuse their behavior, overlook red flags, or tell themselves, "It's not that bad," but it is. And by the time you realize it, the damage is already done. What manipulators leave behind isn't just broken trust, it's broken people. Victims don't just lose money or time. They often lose confidence in their own judgment. They question their memories, their decisions, even their sanity. Because that's the cruelest trick of all. Manipulators don't just rewrite your reality. They rewrite your belief in yourself. Here's the good news. Knowledge is the antidote. The moment you understand how manipulators operate, you begin to see the strings. You notice the patterns. You recognize when something feels too perfect. And once you see the game, you can't be played the same way again. That's why we're spending this hour together, going deep inside the minds of serial manipulators. Because the only way to protect yourself is to learn their secrets. Why do manipulators crave control so much? Why isn't it enough for them to simply live, to connect, to love like everyone else? Why must they twist relationships into power struggles and turn human bonds into weapons? The answer lies deep in the dark psychology of control. To understand the manipulator, you must step inside their mind, a place where domination isn't just a desire, it's survival. For most people, relationships are built on trust and cooperation. We thrive when others care for us, when we feel safe enough to let down our guard. But for the manipulator, trust is weakness. Safety is an illusion. And love is simply another tool in the arsenal. In their world, life is a constant battlefield where the only choices are to control or to be controlled. And manipulators refuse to be the ones under someone else's thumb. Imagine growing up in a home where affection was conditional, where approval had to be earned through obedience or performance. Imagine discovering, as a child, that crying didn't bring comfort, but strategy did. If you wanted attention, you had to manipulate it. If you wanted safety, you had to play a role. Many manipulators begin shaping their worldview early, in environments where control meant survival. Some come from chaotic families, where being vulnerable was dangerous. Others come from privileged homes, where manipulation was rewarded with power and influence. Regardless of the origin, the conclusion is the same. Control equals safety, and without it, they feel exposed and powerless. This is the twisted psychology that fuels their every move. To them, control is not optional, it's oxygen. Without it, they suffocate. With it, they thrive. But unlike healthy individuals who find fulfillment in cooperation and balance, manipulators see human connection as a zero-sum game. If someone else holds power, then they are losing. And losing, to them, feels like death. This mindset creates a warped lens through which they view the world. They don't see people as equals. They see them as pieces on a board. Every interaction becomes a calculation. Who has the upper hand? Who's vulnerable? Who can be bent? They are constantly weighing dominance and submission, often without realizing how deeply ingrained this instinct has become. It's automatic, like breathing. To grasp this hunger for control, consider how a manipulator feels when they're not in charge. They panic. Anxiety floods in. They become restless, suspicious, and paranoid. They hate uncertainty, because uncertainty means risk. What if someone else turns the tables? What if they're the ones being manipulated? To prevent this nightmare, they strike first. They seize the power before anyone else can, building layers of defense through charm, deceit, or intimidation. By keeping others off balance, they ensure no one ever gets close enough to threaten them. But control isn't just about fear. It's also about ego. Many manipulators develop a godlike complex, believing they are smarter, sharper, or more deserving than everyone else. Each time they successfully bend someone's will, they feel a rush of superiority, a validation of their identity as the one pulling the strings. It's intoxicating. Control becomes an addiction, and people become the drug. Like any addict, they need more and more of it to feel alive. The stakes must keep rising. The games must keep escalating. Picture a manipulator in a relationship. At first, they're charming, pouring attention and affection into their partner. But beneath the surface, they're already analyzing, how easily can I influence this person? How far can I push before they push back? Once the answer is clear, the dynamics shift. Small criticisms creep in. Guilt is applied like pressure on a wound. Silence becomes a weapon. The partner doesn't realize it, but their behavior is slowly being reshaped. Not through force, but through the steady drip of psychological control. And the manipulator? They sit back and watch, thrilled at the power of invisible influence. This is where the psychology gets even darker. For some manipulators, control is not just about security or ego. It's about identity. Without control, they feel worthless. Their entire sense of self is built on being the one in charge. So, when life challenges them, when someone resists, when someone calls them out, they react with rage, panic, or calculated vengeance. They can't stand the thought of being ordinary. They must dominate to prove they exist. It's important to note that not all manipulators are conscious of these drives. Some know exactly what they're doing, strategizing like chess masters. Others, however, are simply following patterns they've lived with for so long that it feels natural. To them, manipulation isn't manipulation. It's just how relationships work. They genuinely believe everyone plays games. It's just that they play them better. And yet, beneath all the masks and power plays, there's something tragically fragile about the manipulator's mind. Their need for control often comes from a deep, unhealed wound, a fear of abandonment, a terror of rejection, a belief that, if they don't control others, they will be discarded or destroyed. Ironically, the very thing they crave, connection, is the very thing they sabotage with their manipulative behavior. Because true connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing they can't tolerate. Let's return to the question we began with. Why do manipulators crave control? The answer is layered. For some, it's survival. For others, it's ego. For many, it's both. Control is the lens through which they understand life. It's the only language they trust. It's their shield, their sword, their identity, their addiction. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Because when a manipulator enters your life, they're not interested in compromise. They're not seeking equality. They're seeking dominance. And if you don't recognize the signs, you'll be drawn into their psychology before you even know what's happening. This is why manipulation feels so suffocating. It's not just that someone is influencing you, it's that they're reshaping your reality to feed their need for control. You may feel confused, drained, or even crazy. You may question your judgment, second-guess your instincts, and find yourself apologizing for things you never did. That's not an accident. That's the manipulator's psychology at work. By destabilizing your mind, they stabilize their own. By making you doubt yourself, they confirm their power. And yet, here's the most unsettling part. Many manipulators genuinely believe they're not doing anything wrong. In their world, control isn't abuse. It's survival. It's strategy. It's simply the way things are. If you get hurt in the process, that's not their problem. From their perspective, if you allowed yourself to be controlled, you were weak, and weakness deserves no sympathy. This mindset justifies everything. It silences guilt, it silences conscience, and it allows them to continue playing their games without remorse. But deep inside, buried beneath layers of denial and arrogance, there is often a flicker of fear. Fear that one day someone will see through them. Fear that the mask will crack. Fear that they will finally meet a person who cannot be controlled. That fear is why they work so hard to maintain their grip. Because for the manipulator, exposure is the ultimate defeat. To be unmasked is to be powerless. And for them, powerlessness is unbearable. This, then, is the psychology of control. A mind wired to dominate, a heart shielded by fear, and a life built on the endless pursuit of power over others. To understand this is to understand the manipulator's core. And once you see it, you can never mistake it again. What makes a lie believable? Is it the words themselves? The confidence of the speaker? Or is it something darker? Something buried deep in the psychology of both the liar and the listener? Manipulators know the answer, and once you step inside their world, you'll see that the perfect lie is not about deception alone. It's about rewriting reality. A good liar doesn't just invent a story. They design an experience. They shape your emotions, your expectations, even your doubts, until the lie feels safer, more comfortable, and more logical than the truth. And the most dangerous part? You won't even realize it's happening. Imagine this. You ask a friend if they've seen your missing wallet. They glance at you, shrug casually, and say, "No, of course not." Their eyes hold steady, their voice calm, their body relaxed. The words sound ordinary, but what makes you believe them isn't just what they said. It's what they made you feel. They projected innocence. They mirrored your concern. They sprinkled in just enough indignation to make you feel guilty for even asking. In that moment, your brain doesn't weigh evidence. It weighs emotion, and the lie slips in unnoticed. Manipulators are masters of this process. They understand that lies don't have to be complex. In fact, the simpler the lie, the easier it is to swallow. A simple statement, delivered with the right tone, can override logic in seconds. Because people don't fact-check every word they hear. They judge truth based on trust, on body language, on consistency with their worldview. And manipulators exploit these shortcuts relentlessly. But the perfect lie doesn't begin with the lie itself. It begins with groundwork. A manipulator knows that to sell a lie, you must first sell credibility. This is why the grooming phase matters so much. Before they ever tell a lie, they've already built an image of themselves as honest, trustworthy, and safe. They've positioned themselves as someone you'd never question. And once you believe in their character, their words slide past your defenses like a knife through silk. Consider how cult leaders operate. They don't start by announcing wild, unbelievable doctrines. They begin with truths, small, relatable, undeniable truths. They gain trust. They build authority. And once the trust is cemented, they gradually introduce distortions, twisting reality piece by piece until followers can't separate truth from lies. By the time the most outrageous claims are made, the groundwork is so strong that people accept them without question. This is the architecture of the perfect lie. Start with truth, weave in small distortions, expand gradually, and deliver it all with confidence. The lie doesn't exist in isolation. It's camouflaged within a forest of truth. And because the human brain is wired to conserve energy, we don't question every detail. We assume consistency equals honesty. Manipulators know this, and they weaponize it. But lies aren't only about what's said. Sometimes they're about what's left unsaid. Silence can be just as manipulative as speech. Imagine asking your partner where they were last night. They look at you, pause, and then laugh lightly, changing the subject. That pause plants doubt. That laugh dismisses your concern. Without uttering a single false word, they've shifted the focus, leaving you uneasy but unable to pinpoint why. This is lying without lying, distorting truth through omission, redirection, and ambiguity. And it's one of the manipulator's favorite tools. The psychology behind this works because humans hate uncertainty. When someone leaves a gap in the story, our brains rush to fill it. And often, we fill it with assumptions that favor the person we trust. Manipulators rely on this instinct. They don't need to tell you exactly what happened. They just need to steer you toward the conclusion they want. You'll do the rest for them. But what makes the perfect lie truly sinister is not the content. It's the delivery. The best manipulators don't overact. They don't fidget nervously or add too many details. Instead, they match their behavior to your expectations. If you expect shock, they give you shock. If you expect calm, they give you calm. If you expect denial, they deny, but in a way that feels natural, not rehearsed. They become actors in a play where you're the audience, and the script is tailored to your psychology. Here's the terrifying part. Manipulators study you long before they lie to you. They notice how you react under stress, how you handle conflict, what you believe about people. If you're the type who prides yourself on being forgiving, their lies will lean on appeals to your compassion. If you're skeptical by nature, they'll lace their lies with just enough truth to satisfy your need for logic. In other words, every perfect lie is custom-made. And it doesn't stop there. Once a lie is told, the manipulator reinforces it with behavior. They double down when questioned. They repeat it casually in unrelated conversations. They act consistently with the false story until the lie feels like a memory, not an invention. Over time, the line between truth and fiction blurs so completely that even you begin to defend their lie as if it were your own. Consider how gaslighting works. Gaslighting is the art of using lies to make you doubt your own perception of reality. A manipulator might move your belongings and insist you misplaced them. They might deny saying something you clearly remember. They might insist that your feelings are irrational, your memory faulty, your judgment flawed. The lie is not just about a fact, it's about your ability to perceive truth at all. And once they succeed, they've achieved the ultimate manipulation. They've made you mistrust yourself. The most disturbing part of the perfect lie is that it doesn't always feel malicious. Sometimes, manipulators lie in ways that make you feel loved, valued, or special. They promise you a future they have no intention of giving. They flatter you with words they don't believe. They swear loyalty while secretly plotting betrayal. The sweetness of these lies is what makes them so effective. You don't want to question them, because they feed your deepest desires. And so, you accept the poison, sip by sip, until it becomes impossible to tell where the truth ends and the lies begin. Think of the con artist who romances wealthy victims. They don't start by asking for money. They start by showering affection, painting a picture of a perfect life together. The lies are drenched in fantasy and hope. By the time the request for money comes, the victim doesn't see it as a red flag. They see it as an investment in their dream. That's the genius of the perfect lie. It doesn't feel like deception. It feels like destiny. And yet, behind every perfect lie is cold calculation. Manipulators rehearse their stories, test your reactions, and refine their tactics over time. Each successful lie becomes a lesson, each failed attempt a strategy to improve. They are students of human psychology, and you are their subject. What makes them so frightening is not just their ability to lie. It's their ability to lie so well that you thank them for it. So how can you defend yourself? The first step is awareness. Lies often sound perfect because they're designed to. But truth, real truth, is often messy. People forget details. They hesitate. They correct themselves. Manipulators, on the other hand, tend to tell stories that are too smooth, too consistent, too flawless. If something feels rehearsed, it probably is. Pay attention to what's missing as much as to what's said. And most importantly, trust the unease in your gut. That quiet voice that whispers, "Something isn't right," is often your best defense. The art of the perfect lie reveals something critical about manipulators. Their power doesn't come from brute force. It comes from subtlety. They don't need to break down doors when they can slip through cracks in your perception. They don't need to scream lies when they can whisper them gently into your ear, disguised as truth. And the more you believe, the deeper the control becomes. What if your emotions weren't really yours? What if the fear you feel, the guilt that weighs you down, the love that binds you, were carefully planted inside you by someone else? This is the terrifying reality of emotional puppeteering. The art manipulators use to turn human feelings into invisible strings. And once those strings are attached, they don't need force, they don't need lies. They simply tug, and you move. Think about it. Every decision you make, every bond you form is driven by emotion. Logic may whisper in the background, but it is emotion that truly decides. We buy because we feel desire, we obey because we feel fear, we stay because we feel love. Manipulators know this. They don't waste energy fighting your logic. Instead, they slip past it, straight into the raw emotional core that drives your behavior. Once they're there, resistance becomes almost impossible. Imagine a manipulator who wants control over their partner. They don't demand it outright. Instead, they drip guilt into the relationship. They say things like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me?" Or, "If you really loved me, you'd do this one thing." Each word is a hook designed to pierce the heart, to make their partner feel responsible for their happiness. And the moment guilt takes hold, the partner moves, not because they want to, but because they feel they must. Guilt is only one string. Another favorite is fear. Fear is primal, ancient, and incredibly effective. A manipulator may threaten abandonment. "If you leave me, you'll regret it." They may hint at consequences. "You don't know what I'm capable of." They may even disguise fear as concern. "I just worry about what could happen to you if you don't listen." However it's delivered, the message is clear: comply or suffer. And fear, more than almost any other emotion, makes people obey. But fear and guilt are only part of the puppet master's toolkit. There's also love, the sweetest, most intoxicating string of all. Love is powerful because it disarms us. When we love, we trust. When we trust, we open our defenses. And manipulators exploit this vulnerability with ruthless precision. They shower you with affection, praise, and attention until your brain lights up with dopamine and oxytocin, chemicals that bond you deeply to them. Then, once you're hooked, they begin withdrawing that love, piece by piece, until you're desperate to earn it back. This cycle of giving and taking creates a powerful dependency. You'll chase their affection, even at the cost of your own freedom. Picture this. A partner who once texted you constantly now leaves you waiting for hours. The compliments that once flowed easily now come rarely, unpredictably. Each time they withdraw, you feel a pang of insecurity. Each time they return, you feel relief. Before long, you're dancing to their rhythm, addicted to the highs and lows of their emotional game. This isn't love. It's conditioning, and it's one of the most effective forms of control. Then there's shame. Shame digs deeper than guilt, striking at the core of identity. While guilt says, "You did something wrong," shame says, "You are wrong." A manipulator may weaponize your insecurities, highlight your flaws, or compare you unfavorably to others. Over time, you begin to see yourself as unworthy, flawed, even broken. And in that state, you cling to the very person who made you feel that way, because you believe no one else would accept you. That is the genius of shame. It doesn't just bind you to the manipulator, it erases your will to leave. But perhaps the most insidious string of all is hope. Hope is what keeps victims tethered long after the lies and abuse have been exposed. The manipulator sprinkles in just enough kindness, just enough promises of change, to keep you waiting. Things will be different this time. I know I've made mistakes, but I love you, and I'll prove it. These words act like fuel for hope, and hope blinds us more effectively than any lie. Because when we want something badly enough, we'll ignore reality to chase the dream. Manipulators understand this deeply. They don't just control through fear or pain, they control through the dream of a better tomorrow. What makes emotional puppeteering so terrifying is how invisible it is. Lies can be spotted, threats can be resisted, but emotions feel natural. You don't question them because they arise inside you. You don't see the strings, you just feel the pull. And the manipulator counts on that blindness. They don't force you to obey. They make you feel like it's your choice. In reality, every choice was orchestrated by the emotions they planted. And here's where it gets even darker. Manipulators often combine these strings, weaving them into intricate webs that leave you completely entangled. One day they guilt you, the next day they shame you, the day after that, they shower you with love. The unpredictability is intentional. It destabilizes your emotional foundation, leaving you desperate for stability. And where do you look for stability? To the very person creating the chaos. This cycle is known as trauma bonding, and it is one of the most powerful traps a manipulator can create. Trauma bonding works because the brain becomes addicted to the cycle of pain and reward. The fear and shame trigger stress hormones, while the moments of affection flood the brain with pleasure chemicals. Over time, the brain wires itself to crave the manipulator, just like an addict craves a drug. You don't stay because you want to. You stay because your nervous system is hooked. That's emotional puppeteering at its peak, turning love into chains you can't see. The effects of this control are devastating. Victims often lose their sense of self, questioning who they are outside of the manipulator's influence. They doubt their worth, their judgment, even their memories. They become shells of themselves, waiting for the next tug of the string. And the manipulator? They revel in it. Because every tear, every apology, every desperate attempt to please is proof of their dominance. What's most chilling is how easily this control can spread beyond personal relationships. Manipulators use emotional puppeteering in workplaces, in politics, even in entire societies. Leaders who incite fear to control populations, advertisers who exploit insecurity to sell products, influencers who use flattery and shame to build loyalty. They are all playing the same game. They are pulling strings you can't see, and millions of people dance without realizing it. So how can you recognize emotional puppeteering when it's happening to you? The key is to notice patterns, not just moments. Everyone feels guilt, fear, or love at times. But if someone consistently makes you feel these emotions in ways that benefit them while draining you, that's not an accident. That's design. Pay attention to the cycle. Pay attention to the highs and lows. Pay attention to whether your emotions feel like they truly belong to you, or if they feel like reactions to someone else's rhythm. The truth is, emotions are powerful. They guide us, connect us, and give meaning to our lives. But in the hands of a manipulator, they become weapons sharper than any blade. Once they attach their strings, they don't just control what you do, they control who you are. Words. They seem harmless, don't they? Just sounds strung together, vanishing into the air as quickly as they're spoken. But in the hands of a manipulator, words are anything but harmless. Words become daggers, chains, and spells. They shape reality, control perception, and bend people into submission. Manipulators know this truth better than anyone. If you can control language, you can control minds. Think about it. Every belief you hold, every story you tell yourself about the world, came to you through words. Someone described reality, and you accepted it. Words shape memory, influence emotion, and construct meaning. And because words feel so ordinary, so natural, we rarely question their power. That's exactly why manipulators use them as their weapon of choice. They don't need to raise their voice. They don't need to strike you. They just speak, and you obey. Imagine a manipulator who wants to dominate their partner. They don't start with cruelty. They start with subtle suggestions. I think you'd look better if you lost a little weight. You're lucky I put up with you. Most people wouldn't. At first, these comments might feel like jokes or offhand remarks. But over time, repeated again and again, they become internalized. The victim begins to see themselves through the manipulator's words, until their own self-image is replaced by the one planted in their mind. This is the first layer of the language of power: repetition. A single comment may sting, but repeated enough times, it rewrites identity. Manipulators understand this instinctively. They drip-feed phrases into your life until they echo in your thoughts even when they're not around. You're nothing without me. No one else will ever love you. You're too emotional. These statements become mantras, chipping away at self-worth one word at a time. But repetition is only one technique. Another is framing. The way a manipulator frames a situation can completely alter how you see it. For example, instead of saying, "I hurt you," they say, "You're overreacting." Instead of admitting fault, they shift the frame. "This isn't about me. It's about your issues." With just a twist of language, responsibility vanishes, and blame is redirected. Suddenly, you're not the victim. You're the problem. And the manipulator? They walk away untarnished. Framing works because humans don't perceive reality directly. We perceive it through interpretation. And interpretation is shaped by words. If someone calls criticism just being honest, you might accept cruelty as truth. If someone calls manipulation love, you might accept control as care. The label shapes the meaning, and the meaning shapes your response. This is why manipulators obsess over words. Because the right word, placed in the right context, can transform poison into honey. But perhaps the most insidious tool in the language of power is suggestion. Manipulators don't always command directly. They plant seeds. I don't think she likes you very much. Are you sure you can trust him? I wonder if you're really cut out for this job. These aren't statements of fact. They're whispers designed to breed doubt. And once doubt takes root, it grows on its own. The manipulator doesn't need to push. They just stand back and watch as your mind does the work. Spinning stories, questioning loyalties, eroding confidence. Suggestion works because of how our brains are wired. We hate uncertainty, so we fill in gaps. When someone hints at betrayal, we search for evidence, and often we find it, even if it doesn't exist. When someone plants fear, we magnify it, imagining scenarios worse than reality. Manipulators exploit this instinct mercilessly, saying less but implying more. They don't need to state the lie outright. They just need you to finish it for them. And then there's silence. Silence might not seem like language, but in the manipulator's arsenal, it's one of the deadliest tools. Think of the silent treatment. No shouting, no insults, just absence. That absence screams louder than words, creates anxiety, guilt, desperation. Victims often bend over backward just to break the silence, apologizing for things they didn't do, promising things they shouldn't promise, all because silence feels unbearable. Manipulators know this. They weaponize absence, turning silence into a leash. Silence also gives manipulators plausible deniability. They can withhold information, dodge questions, or simply refuse to respond. And in that void, you supply your own answers. Your imagination fills the silence with explanations, excuses, even justifications for their behavior. The manipulator doesn't need to lie. They just need to stay quiet long enough for you to lie to yourself. But let's go deeper. The true mastery of the language of power lies in rhythm. Knowing when to use sweetness, when to use poison, when to speak, and when to stay silent. Manipulators often alternate between extremes, creating an unpredictable cycle that keeps you on edge. One day they flatter you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. The next, they cut you down. You're worthless without me. This oscillation destabilizes your emotions, leaving you clinging to their words as if they're the only anchor in the storm. In reality, they are the storm. The brilliance of this technique lies in conditioning. Over time, you begin to crave their positive words so much that you'll endure the negative just to hear them again. It's the same principle casinos use with slot machines. Unpredictable rewards create the strongest addiction. Manipulators turn language into a slot machine, delivering praise and insults in unpredictable rhythms, until you're hooked, waiting desperately for the next payout. This is why victims of manipulation often defend their abusers. They're not always like this. You don't know them like I do. Those defenses come from the intoxicating highs of the manipulator's words. The cruelty gets erased by the memory of sweetness, and the cycle continues word after word, phrase after phrase, until escape feels impossible. But words don't just control individuals. They control entire groups. History is filled with leaders who rose to power not by force, but by speech. They used slogans, chants, and rhetoric to unify people under a cause. They framed enemies, planted fears, and repeated messages until they became truths. Propaganda is just the large-scale version of personal manipulation, the strategic use of language to control thought. And millions fall under its spell because words feel invisible. They slip into the mind unnoticed, shaping beliefs from the inside out. The terrifying thing is that manipulators rarely sound like villains. They sound reasonable, even caring. They use words like, "I just want what's best for you," or, "I'm telling you this because I care." These phrases mask control as kindness, making it harder to resist. After all, who would question someone who claims to care? But the truth is in the effect, not the words. If their care leaves you feeling smaller, weaker, or more dependent, it isn't care. It's control disguised as compassion. So how do you protect yourself from the language of power? The key is awareness. Pay attention not just to what's being said, but how it makes you feel. Do their words consistently leave you doubting yourself, apologizing, or second-guessing reality? Do they frame situations in ways that always benefit them while discrediting you? Do they alternate between praise and criticism in ways that keep you unbalanced? These are the fingerprints of manipulation. Once you see them, the words lose some of their power. Because the truth is this, words only control when they go unchallenged. Once you recognize repetition, framing, suggestion, and silence for what they are, you can step back and reclaim perspective. You can start to hear the difference between genuine communication and weaponized language. And that awareness is the first cut to the strings. The language of power shows us something critical about manipulators. They don't conquer with fists. They conquer with whispers. They don't enslave with chains. They enslave with sentences. And the longer you listen without questioning, the deeper the cage becomes. What if you were living in a prison without bars? What if the walls weren't made of concrete, but of beliefs, doubts, and fears carefully planted inside your own head? This is the essence of mental entrapment. Manipulators don't just influence your choices in the moment. They create entire cages of thought, invisible architectures that reshape how you see the world, yourself, and them. Once the trap is set, they don't need to control every move. You'll do it for them. The most chilling part of mental traps is that they rarely look like traps at all. They feel natural, even self-imposed. You believe you're acting freely, making your own decisions, following your own instincts. But in reality, those instincts have been rewired. The manipulator has built the walls around you so subtly that you mistake confinement for freedom. One of the most common traps is self-doubt. Manipulators plant seeds of uncertainty about your memory, your perception, your worth. At first, it's small. Are you sure you remembered that right? You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. Each phrase chips away at your confidence. Over time, you start questioning your own mind. Did you really hear what you thought you heard? Did you overreact? Maybe you are too sensitive. And once doubt takes root, the manipulator doesn't need to argue anymore. You silence yourself. You second-guess yourself. The trap has closed. Gaslighting is the sharpest weapon in this arsenal. By denying your reality over and over, manipulators train you to rely on theirs. Imagine someone moving your belongings, then insisting you misplaced them. Imagine them swearing they never said something you clearly remember. Imagine them twisting past events until you can't tell memory from illusion. This is not just lying. This is erasure. And once your sense of reality is erased, you're left with only one compass: the manipulator's version of the truth. Another trap is dependency. Manipulators engineer situations where you believe you can't function without them. They might control money, isolate you from friends, or convince you that no one else understands you. Slowly, the world outside the relationship feels hostile and unsafe, while the manipulator positions themselves as your only anchor. Even if they hurt you, leaving feels more dangerous than staying. That's the brilliance of dependency. The door to the cage is open, but you never step through it, because you're convinced the outside is worse than the prison. Fear of abandonment is another powerful snare. A manipulator might threaten to leave, or simply vanish for periods of time to remind you how fragile your security is. Each disappearance tightens the trap, training you to cling harder, to comply more quickly, to do anything to avoid being left again. This cycle creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the same principle used in slot machines. The unpredictability of loss and return wires your brain to crave the manipulator, no matter how destructive they are. But not all traps are built on fear. Some are built on identity. Manipulators reshape the way you see yourself, molding your sense of worth around their approval. They convince you that you're the strong one, the forgiving one, or the difficult one, depending on what benefits them. Once that label is internalized, you police yourself to live up to it. You don't leave, because strong people don't give up. You don't demand fairness, because forgiving people let things go. The manipulator no longer needs to enforce the rules, you enforce them on yourself. The most dangerous trap, however, is hope. Hope keeps victims tied to manipulators long after the lies and abuse should have broken the bond. The manipulator dangles promise of change, gestures of affection, visions of a better future. And each glimpse of hope convinces the victim to stay just a little longer. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe they really mean it now. Hope becomes the lock on the cage, stronger than fear or guilt, because it disguises captivity as choice. Think of it this way. Fear makes you want to escape. Guilt makes you feel you can't, but hope makes you believe you shouldn't. That's why hope is the most effective chain of all. And manipulators wield it like masters. They don't need you to be happy. They just need you to believe happiness is right around the corner. If only you stay, if only you obey. These traps are not random. They are carefully engineered. Manipulators study their victims, identifying vulnerabilities and weaknesses to exploit. If you fear loneliness, they isolate you. If you crave approval, they alternate between praise and criticism. If you value loyalty, they frame leaving as betrayal. Each strategy is tailored to the individual, making the trap feel personalized, inevitable, inescapable. And once the mind is trapped, the body follows. Victims may stay in toxic relationships, abusive workplaces, or manipulative groups far longer than outsiders can understand. From the outside, it seems simple. Why don't they just leave? But from the inside, the cage feels real, the fear feels overwhelming, and the hope feels irresistible. This is why manipulation is so devastating. It doesn't just control actions. It rewires reality itself. What makes these traps especially cruel is the way they turn victims against themselves. Instead of seeing the manipulator as the problem, victims often blame their own weakness. Maybe I'm too needy. Maybe I did overreact. Maybe I don't deserve better. This internalization deepens the cage because once you believe you're the problem, you stop trying to escape. The manipulator no longer needs to hold the key. You've locked yourself in. And here lies the genius of mental trapping: effortlessness. Once the trap is set, the manipulator can step back. The victim becomes self-policing, self-doubting, self-limiting. It's the ultimate form of control, when someone else lives inside your head, shaping your thoughts from within, without ever lifting a finger. But here's the terrifying part. Mental traps don't always vanish when the manipulator does. Even after escape, victims often carry the cage with them, replaying the doubts, the fears, the self-blame. The manipulator's voice lingers like a ghost, whispering in the mind long after the relationship ends. This is why recovery from manipulation is so difficult. The bars may be invisible, but they remain long after the door is open. So what's the way out? The first step is recognition. To see the trap is to weaken it. Naming the doubts, the fears, the patterns strip them of their invisibility. The second step is perspective. Outside voices, friends, counselors, communities, can reflect reality back to you when your own perception has been warped. And the final step is rebuilding identity. Because manipulators don't just trap you, they erase you. To escape, you must remember who you were before the cage, and who you can become after it. The mind, once trapped, can be freed. But only if you see the prison for what it is. Only if you realize that the walls were never real, that they were built from words, emotions, and illusions designed to keep you compliant. Awareness is the hammer that cracks the first bar. And once the first bar breaks, the whole cage can come down. But here's the unsettling truth. Manipulators are patient. They know these traps take time to set. They're willing to wait, to play the long game, to weave their web strand by strand until escape feels impossible. That patience is not kindness. It's strategy. And it's the reason so many people fall deeper and deeper without realizing it. What makes a predator truly dangerous? It isn't just their strength or their cunning, or even their ruthlessness. It's their patience. The most skilled manipulators understand a simple truth. Control is rarely achieved in a single strike. It's not a sprint. It's a slow hunt, a long game, and the victims often don't even realize they've been targeted until the net has already closed around them. Imagine a spider weaving its web. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It spins thread by thread, carefully, deliberately, until an invisible trap stretches across the air. Then it waits. Hours, days, as long as it takes. The prey doesn't see the web until it's too late, and by then, every path is already blocked. This is exactly how serial manipulators operate. Their patience is not laziness, it's precision. At the start, their moves are almost imperceptible. Compliment here, a suggestion there, a subtle test of boundaries. If you push back, they retreat, adjust, and try again later. If you let it slide, they push a little further. Over time, the boundaries shift so gradually you don't notice you've surrendered them. What once would have shocked you now feels normal. That's the power of slow erosion. This is why manipulators are rarely explosive at first. They don't reveal their full tactics up front. They drip-feed them one by one until resistance becomes harder and harder. It's like boiling a frog. If you drop it in boiling water, it leaps out immediately. But if you heat the water slowly, degree by degree, it stays put until it's too late. Manipulators turn life into that pot of water, raising the heat so gradually you never realize you're being cooked alive. But patience isn't just about timing, it's about observation. Manipulators study their targets with clinical precision. They watch how you react to compliments, to criticism, to silence. They test your triggers. What makes you insecure? What makes you proud? What makes you fearful? Every interaction is data, every response a clue. They're not just conversing, they're gathering intelligence for the long game. And when they strike, it never feels sudden. By the time they exploit you, you've already been softened, shaped, prepared. You think you're making your own choices, but in reality, those choices were engineered months before. That's why victims often say, "I don't know how it got this bad." Because it didn't happen in a moment. It happened in countless small moments, spread across time, disguised as normal life. One of the most chilling tactics of patient manipulators is grooming. This is the gradual process of building trust, lowering defenses, and embedding dependency. It can happen in relationships, workplaces, even entire communities. The manipulator presents themselves as supportive, generous, even selfless. They create comfort, security, and loyalty. But slowly, imperceptibly, the balance shifts. That comfort turns into control. That generosity turns into leverage. That loyalty turns into bondage. By the time the victim realizes the truth, they're already entangled in obligations and emotions too heavy to escape. Patience also shows itself in cycles. Manipulators often repeat patterns. Conflict, reconciliation, promises, relapse. Knowing each cycle deepens the bond. After a fight, they may withdraw, letting the silence stretch until the victim begs for resolution. Then they return with kindness, apologies, even grand gestures of love. The relief is so overwhelming that the victim clings even tighter. This back and forth isn't accidental, it's conditioning. Each cycle strengthens the cage, making it harder to leave, because the victim remembers not just the pain, but also the highs that follow. Think about it like this. Casinos don't keep people at the table with constant wins. They keep them there with unpredictability. The gambler never knows when the next payout will come, so they keep playing. Manipulators use patience in the same way, by stretching out the cycles. Pain, relief, promises. They ensure their victims stay hooked, waiting for the next payout of affection or approval. But here's where their patience becomes most terrifying. They are willing to wait years. A manipulator in a relationship might spend months slowly isolating their partner from friends and family, knowing they'll be easier to control once the support system is gone. A manipulative boss might keep an employee loyal for years, feeding them promises of promotion that never arrive, but always seem just around the corner. A cult leader might spend decades cultivating followers, one speech at a time, until their influence spans generations. The patience of predators is not passive. It's strategic. Every pause, every delay, every silence is calculated. Sometimes the lack of action is the action. By withholding affection, by waiting just long enough before apologizing, by spacing out moments of kindness, they create a rhythm that their victims adjust to like a dance. The manipulator leads. The victim follows, step by step, until the dance floor is a trap. Another way patience works is through normalization. If someone treats you poorly once, it stands out. But if they treat you poorly 100 times, spread across months or years, it becomes the background noise of the relationship. You stop noticing. You stop resisting. You start believing that's just how things are. And that's exactly what the manipulator wants, for their behavior to feel ordinary, unremarkable, expected. Patience is how cruelty becomes routine. Predators also know the power of waiting for the right moment. They don't demand when you're strong. They wait until you're weak, until you're tired, stressed, grieving, or vulnerable. Then they swoop in, offering comfort, guidance, or solutions. But that help always comes at a cost. Timing is everything, and manipulators, with their endless patience, are willing to wait for years until the perfect crack in your armor appears. This patience also explains why victims often feel guilty after leaving. Because manipulators are not monsters 24/7. They sprinkle in kindness, charm, generosity. They give just enough good moments to rewrite the bad. The victim looks back and sees not just cruelty, but also laughter, affection, and memories of love. Those fragments weren't mistakes. They were investments. The manipulator planted them intentionally, knowing they would bloom later as nostalgia, regret, or doubt. That's patience too, the patience of planting seeds that grow even after they're gone. And here lies the most unsettling truth. Patience makes manipulation invisible. Quick cruelty is obvious. Sudden abuse is recognizable. But slow erosion, that hides in plain sight. By stretching out the process, by taking months or years, manipulators ensure that no single moment feels extreme enough to sound the alarm. The victim adjusts gradually, like a frog in heating water, until the point of no return has quietly passed. But if patience is their greatest strength, it's also their greatest weakness. Because once you see the pattern, the illusion breaks. Once you recognize the slow burn, the long wait, the endless cycles, you can step out of the dance. Patience works best in the shadows, when unnoticed. Shine light on it, and suddenly, their waiting game looks less like power and more like desperation. Still, it's hard to recognize when you're inside it. That's why we must ask the darkest question of all. Why do we fall for manipulators in the first place? Why do so many intelligent, capable people walk willingly into their webs and stay long after the traps are visible? The answer lies not in the manipulator's strength, but in the vulnerabilities of the human mind. Why do smart, capable, even strong people fall into the hands of manipulators? Why do victims stay when outsiders scream, "Just leave"? Why do they excuse, defend, and even love those who twist their minds and poison their lives? The answer is not weakness. It's not stupidity. It's something far more unsettling. The truth is, manipulators don't exploit flaws, they exploit humanity itself. They weaponize the very traits that make us human. Trust, love, loyalty, hope. From the moment we're born, our survival depends on connection. As infants, we're helpless, relying entirely on others to feed us, protect us, nurture us. That primal need for attachment doesn't vanish as we grow older. It evolves. As adults, we still crave bonds, security, and belonging. Manipulators know this. They don't fight against our instincts, they ride them. They cloak control in the language of love, obedience in the guise of loyalty, and exploitation in the mask of trust. And because these instincts run so deep, most people don't even realize they're being used against them. Take trust, for example. Trust is the foundation of every relationship, romantic, familial, professional. Without it, society itself would collapse. Manipulators understand that trust is both powerful and fragile. They rush to build it quickly, showering their targets with attention, affection, and promises. Psychologists call this love bombing, the overwhelming flood of validation that creates instant connection. Victims feel seen, valued, even cherished. And once trust is established, the manipulator begins to bend it, stretching it thinner and thinner until it no longer resembles trust at all, but dependency. Then there's empathy. Empathy is what allows us to connect deeply with others, to share joy and pain, to care beyond ourselves. But empathy is also a doorway for exploitation. Manipulators play on guilt, sympathy, and compassion. They tell stories of hardship to justify cruelty. They cry when confronted, flipping the script so the victim feels like the villain. They position themselves as wounded, misunderstood, in need of saving. And because victims are empathetic, they step in again and again, mistaking exploitation for love. Another vulnerability is hope. Hope is what keeps us alive through suffering, what drives us to believe in change and redemption. But hope is also the chain that binds victims to manipulators. Each apology, each promise, each fleeting moment of kindness becomes proof that maybe, just maybe, things will get better. Victims hold on, not because they're blind, but because they see glimpses of the person they once loved, or the leader they once admired, or the boss they once respected. They wait for the return of that version, even if it never comes. Hope becomes the drug, and the manipulator controls the supply. Fear is another thread in the victim's mind. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being alone. Manipulators exploit these fears ruthlessly. They threaten to leave, withdraw affection, or remind victims that no one else will ever care for them. Over time, victims internalize these fears, convincing themselves that life outside the manipulator's grasp would be unbearable. They stay not because they're trapped by force, but because they're trapped by terror. But perhaps the deepest vulnerability is identity. Our sense of self is fragile, shaped by feedback from those around us. Manipulators slowly rewrite identity, erasing the person their victim once was and replacing it with a version that serves them. Victims begin to see themselves as the manipulator sees them. Flawed, weak, unworthy. They forget who they were before, and once identity is stolen, escape feels impossible. Because who are you, if not the reflection they've given you? It's easy for outsiders to scoff, to say, "I'd never fall for that." But the truth is, anyone can. Manipulators are equal opportunity predators. They don't target the weak, they target the human. The professor, the CEO, the parent, the teenager, anyone can be ensnared because the traps are built from the very qualities we all possess. In fact, strong people often make the best victims because manipulators see their loyalty, their empathy, their determination as fuel for exploitation. Consider how cults recruit. They don't lure in the desperate or the foolish. They often attract the intelligent, the idealistic, the passionate. Why? Because those qualities, passion, loyalty, commitment, can be twisted into obedience. A desire to change the world becomes a willingness to follow blindly. A craving for community becomes surrender to control. The very strengths of the victim become the chains that hold them down. And once inside, the mind begins to adapt. Victims experience something psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. On one hand, they know the manipulator is cruel, selfish, even abusive. On the other, they believe they love them, need them, or depend on them. The dissonance is unbearable. So, the mind resolves it by rationalizing. They're only like this because they're stressed. They didn't mean it. They'll change. These justifications ease the pain but deepen the trap, reinforcing the manipulator's power. Then comes trauma bonding, the emotional glue created by cycles of abuse and reconciliation. The highs and lows, the punishment and reward, create an addiction stronger than reason. Victims crave the relief of reconciliation so badly that they endure the abuse to get it. The bond feels unbreakable, even when it's destructive. And because it's rooted in both fear and love, it's one of the hardest chains to sever. The victim's mind is not blind, it's conflicted. They see the cracks, the cruelty, the manipulation, but they also see the good moments, the apologies, the promises. And in that tension, they choose to believe the version that gives them hope. Because the alternative, that they've been deceived, exploited, used, feels unbearable. Admitting the truth means admitting they've been trapped, and no one wants to believe they've been living inside a cage. This is why manipulation is so powerful. It doesn't just control actions, it controls meaning. It rewrites love as obedience, loyalty as sacrifice, abuse as passion. Victims are not fools. They are human beings caught in carefully constructed illusions, illusions designed to prey on the deepest needs of the human heart. And here lies the most chilling revelation. If you think you're immune, you're already vulnerable. Overconfidence blinds us to subtle influence. Believing, "It could never happen to me," makes us reckless, dismissive of red flags, eager to believe we're in control. Manipulators love that confidence. It makes the fall even easier. But there is hope in understanding. When victims begin to see the patterns, when they recognize the exploitation of trust, empathy, hope, and identity, the illusion begins to crack. They start to reclaim their mind piece by piece. They remember who they were before, and slowly, painfully, courageously, they find the strength to break free. Still, escape is never easy, because even when the victim sees the truth, the manipulator is often waiting. Waiting with charm, with apologies, with promises of change. Waiting with patience, ready to draw them back into the cycle. Which brings us to the final question. How do you truly break free? How do you escape the web once it's been spun? Picture a fly caught in a spider's web. At first, the strands seem thin, breakable, fragile. But the more it struggles, the tighter the web clings. Each movement entangles it further, until exhaustion takes over and escape feels impossible. This is exactly how manipulation works. The victim doesn't even realize they've been ensnared until the strands of fear, guilt, hope, and dependency have already wrapped tight around their mind. And yet, despite how hopeless it feels, escape is possible. The key is not brute force, but awareness, strategy, and courage. The first step in escaping manipulation is recognition. You cannot fight what you cannot see. Manipulators thrive on invisibility, on making their control feel natural, inevitable, even deserved. That's why victims often live for years under manipulation without realizing it. To escape, the fog must lift. The questions must be asked. Does this relationship leave me smaller or stronger? Do their words build me or break me? Do their actions match their promises? These questions cut through illusion, exposing the cracks in the web. But recognition alone isn't enough, because manipulators are masters of doubt. The moment you question them, they twist reality. They gaslight, they guilt trip, they remind you of your weaknesses. That's why the second step is perspective. Victims must step outside the manipulator's world and into the light of other voices. Friends, family, therapists, even strangers can reflect back a reality that's been distorted. Hearing someone say, "That's not normal," can be the lifeline that snaps the spell. Yet even with perspective, escape is terrifying. Because manipulation rewires the victim's fears and hopes. Leaving often feels like betrayal. Guilt whispers, "You're abandoning them." Fear hisses, "You'll never survive without them." Hope pleads, "They'll change if you just stay a little longer." These voices are not truth. They are echoes of the manipulator. Recognizing them as such is critical. They are the strands of the web, sticky and deceptive, but not unbreakable. Breaking free often begins with small acts of resistance. Setting boundaries, saying no, reclaiming independence in tiny steps, a bank account, a hobby, a friendship rekindled. Each act weakens the web, loosening its grip strand by strand. Manipulators may retaliate, tightening control, lashing out, or showering with affection to reel the victim back in. This backlash is not proof of failure. It is proof of progress. It means the web is shaking. Sometimes, escape requires distance. Physical distance, emotional distance. Cutting off contact, at least temporarily, can be the only way to clear the fog. Manipulators thrive on proximity, the ability to speak, to charm, to twist. Distance robs them of their weapon. But distance is frightening. It feels like stepping into the unknown after years in the cage. And yet, that step is where freedom begins. The hardest part of escape is rebuilding identity. Because manipulation doesn't just trap you, it erases you. Victims often emerge from toxic relationships unsure of who they are, what they believe, what they want. They must relearn themselves piece by piece. It is slow, it is painful, but it is also liberating. With every rediscovered passion, every reclaimed confidence, every act of self-definition, the voice of the manipulator fades. And here's the truth most manipulators never want their victims to realize. Outside the web, they lose their power. Their tricks only work inside the cage of doubt, fear, and hope they constructed. Once you see the patterns, once you name them, once you refuse to play the game, the web collapses. The manipulator stands exposed, not as a master of power, but as a parasite who depended on your silence to survive. But escape is not just about individuals. It's about society. Because manipulators don't just live in homes and offices. They sit in boardrooms, in governments, in pulpits. They weave webs across entire communities, entire nations, entire generations. Escaping on a larger scale requires collective recognition, questioning narratives, demanding transparency, refusing to let fear and hope be weaponized by those who seek control. The personal battle mirrors the societal one. Freedom always begins with awareness. So, how do you know you've truly escaped? Not when the manipulator is gone, but when their voice inside your head is silent. When you no longer question your worth through their words. When your choices come from your own values, not from fear of their punishment or longing for their approval. That silence, that inner freedom, is the real escape. And yet, even after escape, scars remain. Victims may carry doubt, fear, and mistrust long after the manipulator is gone. Healing is not about erasing those scars, but about transforming them. Each scar becomes a reminder. You survived. You saw the web. You broke free. And now you can see the patterns others miss. You can spot the manipulator before they spin their web. You can protect yourself and maybe even protect others still caught inside. Escaping the web is not just survival. It's rebirth. It's the reclaiming of your voice, your will, your life. Manipulators want you to believe you're powerless. But the greatest secret of all is this. Their power was never theirs. It was borrowed from you. And the moment you take it back, the game is over. So, ask yourself now, whose voice is in your head? Who benefits from your doubt, your guilt, your fear? And most importantly, are those strands you feel around you truly unbreakable? Or are they just illusions waiting to be torn apart? Because in the end, the web only holds if you believe it does. The moment you stop believing, the moment you take that first step into the light, you realize the truth manipulators fear most. You were never the fly. You were always the flame. And no web, no matter how carefully spun, can contain a fire once it begins to burn. If this opened your eyes, don't stop here. Subscribe now because the darkest minds hide the deepest secrets, and you won't want to miss what comes next.